We want to explore how we can blend best of blockchain with best of open source. And we have organized a rockstar genius panel to help us understand what exactly does it mean to be open source and what can blockchain ecosystems learn to help move themselves forward. And our rockstar panel includes Johnny Nguyen from IOG. He will moderate our genius panelists. He'll be joined alongside Santiago Carmuega from TxPipe, Arnaud Bailly with IOG, and Matthias Benkort. Please give our panelists a huge round of applause.
Well, hello, Lusan. How's everybody doing today? You guys ready to talk about open source? We've got an amazing panel up here. And maybe I'll kick things off and do a round of introductions. Why don't we start with you, Santiago?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Santiago Carmuega. I'm based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a software developer. I've been developing software for, I think, almost 20 years now. And a year ago, I started this project called TxPipe, which is a company that develops open source tooling for developers working in Cardano.
Awesome, thank you. Arnaud?
Thank you. So I'm Arnaud Bailly. I'm working at IOG. Currently as a new capacity and head of architecture for Cardano, and I was, before that, involved in I was the architect for the Hydra and Mitchell projects. And I've been developing software for way too much, I guess, and yeah, I've been in open source and discovered open source in the late 90s, and since then I've been dabbling into it, so yeah.
That's awesome, thank you. Matthias?
And Matthias, I am technical director at the CF today. I've been a core contributor to different open source projects, including Hydra or Hognios. I've co-created the CIP process also about 4 years ago, I think, and been a CIP editors, authors, and reviewers since there.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm Johnny Nguyen. I'm a director at IOG. I'm passionate about open source. And for the better part of the past year, I've woken up every morning thinking about how to build a members-based organization. And we launched that yesterday as part of the Age of Voltaire. And if you're interested, go and sign up at cardanombo.org. So let's get started with the questions, guys. Typically, when I ask someone about what open source means, and they've never been a part of the open source community, they usually tell me something about source code, the license, and the repo. And totally logical, makes sense because source is in the name. But one of my mentors in open source, Dirk Handel, really helped me to understand and appreciate the role of the community in open source. And while the community, I think, is very important, I've grown to appreciate the community's role in all this. I want to take it back even a step further to where it really starts, and that's usually with someone trying to scratch their own itch. So, Matthias, as a software developer, what does it mean for you to scratch your own itch?
Sorry, to what?
What is it to scratch your own itch, right?
Sorry, I'm not sure to get the question.
Well, developers usually are just solving their own problems,
yeah.
Right? And if their solution doesn't exist, they're just going to go out and build it themselves.
Yeah, okay.
Right? A euphemism for that is to refer to that as a developer scratching their own itch.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So, well, as developers, we are in this situation where we build softwares and tools, but we also use software and tools to build them. So there is often this temptation to build your own stuff. And that's pretty much how many open source projects get started in the first place. You have a particular need, and you're either unhappy with the solution that exists, or you want to build your own solutions because there is none. So you just start doing it to fill your own problem, and rapidly you discover that there are other people with the same problem as you. and they might be also interested in the solution you've built and contribute to it, and that's how you sort of get started to explore solutions like that and get the ball rolling on open source projects.
Yeah, and so it's amazing to think that from somebody like Linus Torvalds scratching their own itch and creating an operating system so many years ago, today we have such a vibrant ecosystem. Similarly with Cardano, it started with Charles's vision, and today we have this amazing, vibrant ecosystem. But I want to bring it back, Arnaud, to that notion of community. And in many ways, people describe open source as a social contract between you and your community. What is the social contract between Cardano and the Cardano code base and the engineering team behind Cardano and the community?
Well, that's a tough one. I would say that really the short contract is to build, I think that from the small space, which I'm aware of, which is really the core stuff that we are building, the Cardano node, the Hydra layer 2 solutions, Mithril engine, I think we are really building, building blocks, or the core engine of the system. And the social contract we have is, we have a duty to build something which is secure, which provides the highest performance, which is really this idea of having this engine humming and buzzing, and it flawlessly works for years. And Cardano, in this respect, is really an achievement. I mean, we are standing on the shoulder of giants who build the thing in a way which is very robust. And but we also have the duty, I think, to make it easy for other people, to make it approachable, to make it easy for other people to build on it. And that's really the thing which we are really striving for now, is make it more approachable, make it more open, and make sure that, and the social contract is really to say, hey, we are building something which is, we are taking into account the wish and desires and the goals and the myriad things that can be built on that people want to do on it. And in counterparty, we are really putting long and hard engineering effort and thoughts, but on the counterparty, that we are making it very transparent. We are making that the decisions we make, or the technical decisions we take, are really very transparent, very obvious, and say, yeah, we did it that way because X, Y, Z, and now you can potentially argue around it, but it becomes a technical argumentation. And then so it's really like, it goes both ways, I would say. So there is a contract of transparency versus responsibility in terms of making the best of the best code we can make.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you think about Cardano as a platform and protocol. In many ways, I think of maybe Steve Jobs when he created iPhone. Probably never could have imagined the vibrant application ecosystem and the accessories ecosystem that we have today. But in order to get to where they're at, they had to build a lot of tooling around that. And so that's a good question for you, Santiago, because in a lot of ways, if Cardano is this platform and protocol that doesn't really envision what's going to be built on top of it, you really anticipate the needs of developers trying to build on Cardano, and you build a lot of tools and solutions for them. Why don't you tell us what are some of the challenges or some of the nuances that most developers that are new to Cardano, or non-developers, maybe have a hard time appreciating about some of the idiosyncrasies of building on Cardano?
Yes, well, I think that developers, when they approach Cardano, they are faced with a very hard onboarding process that makes sense because it's a new technology, it's innovation all over the place. The UTXO model, it's something that developers need to understand, and maybe they are not familiar with that coming from other ecosystems. And also, we need to understand that working with blockchain is harder than working with other technologies. Sometimes we, as developers, think that the newest technology means more developer-friendly, and I don't think that's the case for blockchain. We should understand that blockchain is trying to fix a social issue, and by that we need to implement more complex technology. And developers, when they get into the Web3 sphere, they are faced with that. So they have a very steep learning curve that they have to go through. And I believe that our focus, if we want to promote adoption, should be on developer experience. We should try to lower the entry barrier so that we get more developers and more the apps, and that will finally bring end users to the system.
Yeah, and I certainly have to applaud you for the documentation and the landing pages that you have on all of the projects on TxPipe. In particular, I wanted to focus for a second on URA. The name of this tool is inspired by the tail command available in Unix.
Yeah.
I love that a lot of projects, kind of like Ogmios, is inspired by Ogmios, the Celtic deity of eloquence, right? And I think that there's a lot of cheekiness with project founders always, and they find ways to kind of embed Easter eggs and things. But you say that the URA is based on the Unix tail command, and Cardano's consensus protocol, Ouroboros, is a reference to the ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon eating its own tail. So URA is literally ancient Greek word for tail. You describe URA as the tail of Cardano. Can you tell us a little bit about the approach you've taken with TxPipe, both take data off the chain and do something, compare it also with perhaps CARP, because both solutions take data off the chain and do something with it. What are some of the similarities and differences?
Yeah, sure. Aura started, as you were saying before, by trying to scratch my own itch.
Yeah.
When I first approached Cardano as a technology, I needed a way to extract real-time data from the chain, and I didn't have anything simple that I could use out of the box. And that gave birth to Aura. The idea is that we tend to think of blockchain as a database, and that's the wrong approach. I think that we should try to approach it in a more event-driven way, thinking that the ledger is just something live that generates events and consumes events. And Aura tries to be a tool that allows you to connect that blockchain into event-driven stream processing tools such as Kafka, another open source tool, and any kind of queue processing technology that we have there. The idea is that it's plug and play. Now, compared to CARP, the goal is a little bit different, I believe. Aura tries just to connect a stream of events. CARP tries to provide an efficient way to describe the state of the ledger in a relational model. And both use cases are valid and complementary. I believe that you can use Aura to react to things that happen, and you can use CARP to check the state of the ledger, current and historical. And
build an index on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. For those of you that don't know, Matthias used to work at IO, and his webcam never used to work, and so his picture on his Google Meet stuff would always be just the face of a yellow duck, and similarly on Twitter. So it's good to finally see Matthias and see that he's got legs beneath that duck head. Matthias, everybody I've ever spoken to talks about you and describes you as somebody who's really passionate about open source. Where does that passion come from, and what do you attribute it to?
That's a good question. I think it goes back to very much the first time I started really doing programming. I started very early in my life, like around 10, 11 years old. And I got into programming and computer science through resources available on the internet. Right? So there was a lot of free resources, free documentation, or just sometimes blog posts that people would put out and take a weekend to describe an entire tutorial or process. And that's sort of how you get to learn. Then I followed engineering school and did the normal standard path for that. But when I started professionally writing code, I just thought that's the only way to write code. Right? And from I think day one, the first project that it was open source, and I always looked for a mission that had a focus on open source as well. Because to me, it is important. It's how we build software in general. They have to be open source. That's the only way, the only sane way to build software is to collaborate, to contribute, and to keep this growing. And I think that's why IT today and software development has so much grown in the past years, and why we could take projects like Linux, right, and take them to different scale. It was because they were open source from the start and because people could contribute. So it just comes from, I guess, my experience with the software development, and I kind of replicated that, and also, put my own sauce in it, right? Try to make it my own, and after years, you start mastering a bit the codes of open source, what it means for something to be open source, what you would expect also yourself from an open source project. And now when I do a project, I try to put in them everything I would like to see on another project. Because I put myself always as a user, a consumer of those things, and I'm always thinking, what would I like to see on a project? What kind of documentation would I like to have? How would I want to use that tool, to install that tool, and so forth. And I just make it happen for my projects, and usually it makes people happy.
Yeah, so would you say in some ways there's even a little bit of overhead from doing things in a more open way, but that the ROI or the reward for doing it the right way, the open way, the first time, is just worth it?
It is. And I'm always thinking, if everything was like that, if all the software were really carefully crafted and that people put as much effort in open source as they could, then we would have a much pleasant time in developing software also and consuming any existing solutions really that exist. So it's a little bit of effort, but what you gain also in return is also not only people that use your software and give you feedback, but also if you make things right, contributors that are willing to join you on your mission and that want to help make your own software better because they have also their own ideas and their own needs that you have maybe not foreseen in the first place. So making the room welcoming enough that people can join and help you on the task, that's an effort, but definitely worth taking.
Thank you. So Arnaud, kind of building on that point a little bit, Cardano today is already licensed under an Apache license. It's already in a public repo. And you could argue in many ways it's already open source. There's already a lot of contributors and people looking at the Cardano code base. It's got about, last I checked, about 7,000 GitHub stars. But as we discussed, a big part of open source is the community. And if I was an aspiring developer, passionate about Cardano, wanting to kind of learn the code base, I know it's a little bit challenging because of the years of embedded design decisions and everything in there. What would be a good entry point, where could somebody start if they wanted to navigate their way around the Cardano code base?
That's another good question. I wouldn't preach and I know everything there is to know about the Cardano code base, but I think the thing with open source is that the code doesn't lie, right? That's the thing. You have the code at your disposal. So I would say one of the things that one of the good entry points at the end of the day is really to start unbundling the thing and starting looking at the code. So probably a good entry point if somebody is an engineer today and wants to get into I have an interest in blockchain technology. I want to start a career or start hacking on stuff and maybe build a tool on top of it. Probably tools like Cardano node it would be the first entry point. Obviously, the Cardano node repository. There are quite a lot of docs out there that people can find on the Cardano Foundation website. But the truth is that most of the time it's easier to approach the Cardano, the core of the system through, maybe tools like Ogmios, I would say, is a good entry point, because Ogmios exposes a lot of the details of the system in a way which is more approachable. And then later on delve into the intricate details of there is a node, there is a consensus, there is a network. Each of those parts are quite tricky, and of course there is the ledger. It's one of the things that we are currently, I think as a community and as a team, the team I am working with is trying to also to make it, as you say, more approachable. It's not as approachable as it should be, as it could be, and as it should be, and so I think we are also trying to improve in that respect, so that this question should be answered very easily. The entry point in there. Just go to the repository, start there.
So if I understand what you're saying, partly is that there is a lot of advanced embedded protocol, computer science that goes into the development of core Cardano node, and perhaps maybe a better approach, and one that I've certainly benefited from my programming engineering journey, is to kind of poke and prod around the outside of that thing.
Yep.
Treat it like a black box, push some buttons, pull some levers. And perhaps in that regard, Santiago, going back to the tools exposed by TxPipe team, whether it's Demeter, Palace, or Ura, perhaps how could some of those projects be used to help onboard a new developer wanting to play with and build on or tinker with Cardano?
Yeah, so I think that the best way, if you want to get into Cardano as a developer, is first to try to integrate something. Not try to get into the weeds of the core components, but rather see what you can do with the data, see what you can do by building transactions, and maybe start on the outside, as you were mentioning. People think, or at least in my experience when I talk to developers, we tend to think that developing blockchain means developing smart contracts. But actually, if you look at the code bases out there, if you want to build the app, the off-chain components, the front ends, the integration layer, it's, in terms of size, is much more code than what you end up building for the smart contract. So I would say that if you want to start your journey in Cardano or in the blockchain ecosystem, you should start from there, from the outside. See if you can integrate some kind of front end, some kind of indexer on top of the data, some kind of transaction builder that you can use to send data. And if you see the list of tools that we have in TxPipe, they tend to be those kind of components that integrate. So I think that's the best way to approach it.
Awesome. Matthias, when we talk about kind of getting started, the often used analogy in software engineering or programming or hacking around is your typical hello world example. What would you recommend to somebody as a hello world in Cardano?
Well, I would typically recommend multiple error words, starting from each era of Cardano and following that up, right? So you start with Byron and you try to make a simple payment, because that's basically all that was available in the Byron era. It was very simple. You get an input and output that gets you to acknowledge to the UTXO model, to the node, how it works, and everything you will use to construct your transaction, submit it, observe it, you can reuse that across all the other eras after that. And once you've done that first step, you can move into the second era, which is Shelley. And in Shelley, you've got introduction of delegation, rewards, and a bit more complicated stuff. You can start playing with that. Then you go to Allegra, where you have native scripts that were introduced, and this little degrees of programmability on-chain. You can start playing with that too. Then you move to Mary. Mary was the multi-asset UTXO, where you can start minting your own tokens, play with that, have a UTXO that contains bundles of different assets. Then you move to Alonzo, where you have the Bluetooth contract that get introduced, and so on to now we have the Babbage era and following up. But I think the eras themselves, they are very good tutorial kind of steps to follow, because they gradually introduce you different features in the Cardano ecosystem, and they are still present on the blockchain because of how Cardano is built, right? Cardano is this succession of eras that gets more and more complicated, and features, upgrades get added. So the basic stuff is make a payment, make a transaction, because everything is about a transaction in the end. Right? From delegation to interacting with the contract, you always end up building and submitting a transaction. But you can gradually make it more and more complex and sort of get accustomed to all those new features until you master it all in the end.
That's awesome. So when we talk about open source, a big challenge with open source is sustainability, maintainer burnout, and sometimes toxicity of the community. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know this is an open question to anybody that wants to answer it. What are some of the ways that you try to nurture and build and support your community and monitor for maintainer burnout?
I have an idea. It's still in the works, but I think that the main component of an open source project is the governance aspect of it. And there are different ways. They are identified even. There is the benevolent dictator, one person that decides what gets merged, what are the priorities. You can get also an alternative is to have a steering committee, some board that takes those decisions. And the one that we train out in TxPipe, it's usually called do-ocracy, in the sense that the people that make the work, the people that are putting the effort in the code base are the ones that decide the roadmap and the priorities and what gets merged. So I think that helps with maintainers burnout because it fluctuates from one group of people to the other depending on the moment of the year, and it also has a sense of fulfillment because there's nothing like doing code for stuff that you know that it's going to make sense. Sometimes you end up understanding that it doesn't, but many times the process is more fulfilling if you're doing, if you're trying to achieve the goals that you set yourself.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think there is one of the things that I think is important, as you say, this community aspect. I think we tend to think it's a given. We tend to think that, yeah, I mean, you know, we talk and we are humans being and everything is fine. But in practice, building a community and fostering a community and maintaining the community takes energy, time, and skills, and especially in terms of communications. And I have a couple of concrete examples in mind in repositories I was involved with where, I mean, and we all have this kind of examples in mind where, oh, somebody is posting an issue, and yeah, I mean, maybe the issue is not phrased in a way that's very, I would say, welcoming or very nice, and somebody starts to answer, and this answer is kind of escalate on the issue, and now you end up having people, you know, arguing and bickering, sometimes over maybe technical stuff, but it's hard to get into a conversation where you're trying to get to the problem rather than trying to, blame people or assign calling names, and that's something that needs to be worked on, and that's something that maybe sometimes require concrete training. I mean, things like, I have a good colleague of mine who is really thinking that if more people would learn nonviolent communication in open source community, then maybe that would help also foster better conversation, because now when you start talking to someone, you start to try to get to the point where what's the problem really they're facing, rather than, oh, the way they're expressing it, and making we are, as developers, making also more aware of the others. Like, yeah, somebody has been, like Matthias had this example, somebody has been hacking on something for 10 hours and banging his or her head on the wall, and And she finds that, that actually it's a problem in the code, it's a bug, and so yeah, she starts to frankly type something in an issue, and this issue is sent somewhere, and this issue will actually hurt someone deeply because that someone has been spending also hours and days in this feature and thought that it was fine. And we need to improve that, and I think that's really something that's a danger in open source communities, which is really toxicity. And we all know, I guess, communities which are very toxic in that respect, and usually they don't last very long, or they end up being like sex. But I think Cardano in this respect, and from my experience, it's rather, yeah, on the upper end of the highest of the scale. It's very good. I mean, in the various projects I've been involved with, especially in Mithril, we have tried to really have this direct access and conversation with SPOs and people building on it. And as soon as you start to speak to people, and as soon as you start to try to be transparent and explain, and actually treat people like adults, usually it goes better. But it requires time and energy, and yeah, that's something we are really trying to push inside the various repository and communities we are working with.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. To add to that point, I'm quite active on Twitter and social media in general. And one thing I realize is you really get to attract people based on how you communicate, and also, that are kind of like-minded. So if you tend to be, passive-aggressive and a bit violent in your communication, the people that will be around your circles are likely going to be also communicating the same way. So many times it takes a lot on you to make sure you communicate properly so that you attract people that have also this similar mindset. And that's also true for open source, right? When someone opens an issue, when someone wants to discuss a problem with you, sometimes it's, if you feel like you're going to give a reply that is maybe not the, most gentle reply you could give, because you are also, you have also your own stress, your own task, and sometimes an issue comes at the wrong time. Sometimes it's best to just, wait it a bit and come back later to it. And to be, on top of that, to be very, very transparent about what you expect from people and how you want people to interact with you on your project. So that's what most repository, most projects on the open source have a contribution guidelines that tells people, how you can open an issue, how you can interact, what kind of maybe delays you can expect in the answer, how you should, formulate things. And this sort of details that makes it very transparent how you are going to communicate with people, how you expect them to communicate with you as well. And most of the time, really most of the time, people that are willing to put effort into collaborating and contributing to a project, they are, they are well-intentioned. They want to do things well, and it's usually pleasant interactions. It's quite rare that there is someone who is very frustrated and pissed off and that just sort of rants on a particular project. And when this happens, it's quite important to understand, why this happened and how you could maybe make it not happen by having extra instructions or by having maybe, I don't know, more examples, stuff like that. Or sometimes it's just, someone that is pissed off, then, you sort of ignore that and you move on.
Yeah, sounds like in the open source world and just in life in general, we could all benefit from a little bit more empathy and compassion, right? And it sounds like it's not even just a matter of nonviolent communication or trying not to escalate things, but perhaps even actively trying to de-escalate things. We did, in fact, observe some of that, and as you know, I'm also active on Twitter, and I see that part of the Twitter algorithm is designed to encourage engagement farming. And so people tend to take more polarizing takes, or dare I say, shit posting, right, just to get a little bit more engagement farming out of that. But whereas when you're actually working on trying to solve a problem, really it's about solving the problem. It's not about getting more engagement. And so trying to understand each other and finding the right words to reduce that level of toxicity is an important part of open source. So kind of with that, sometimes it helps, I think, to have this notion of a code of conduct. What would you like to see included in a code of conduct if the members-based organizations open source program office were to come up with a standardized code of conduct, or would you prefer that each project kind of have its own code of conduct?
Yeah, I think it's tough to answer. It's funny how open source started as a way of developing software, and now it has become a social platform where maintainers are more like content creators, and they need to curate the contributions of an audience, which are the contributors that just come and go. Some stay and turn to be long-term maintainers, but others just are here for a small moment of time and they contribute on some specific thing and they just continue with the next thing. So the actual job of the maintainers is to be able to steer all those contributions. Sometimes in large projects could be hundreds of contributions. So I think that the code of conduct in any project should try to put that dynamic express somehow, that if you're here for a specific thing, you should behave in a certain way, and that the maintainers have the technical skill to decide if that makes sense or not with the roadmap of the project, and that there is also a progression on what you can contribute to a project. Sometimes when you get into a large code base, I don't know, for example, let's say the React open source project, you get to start by contributing with documentation, or maybe if you found a bug, a specific typo somewhere, or a small bug, that's the entry point. And then you escalate with more complex things as you go along. So I think that to avoid issues and friction from the start, a code of conduct, contribution guideline should describe that progression of how you start and where you can end if you put the effort on the long term.
Awesome.
I think it's hard to, I think there are baselines, and in that respect, having a code of conduct which provides baselines, like things like, I mean, it can be summarized visually. Be nice, right? It's mostly what it is. Be nice, be inclusive, and don't deter people, or don't consider people as adults and as good-willing in the first place. I think there is a baseline. Whether or not there should be one code of conduct that's kind of replicated, or there should be specific projects should have their own code of conduct. I think most of the time having one is fine, and then if there are specificities, the question is practically what it means. A code of conduct is just a way of saying, hey, we expect you to behave, or we expect everyone involved in that project to behave in some way. And most of the time that way is pretty obvious. It's just an explicit, it's just a way to explicitly state something which should be implicit in everyone, but usually it's not. It's like, you don't harass people, you don't segregate people because of whatever gender, race, orientation, and any kind of others thing like that. And you are here also. We are all in the same boat. We are here to build something, and I think that's where things start to be a bit. I think there is I like the answer, but there is a question for the open source community that sometimes, as you mentioned, the open source was meant for builders, people who they come for something, they scratch an itch, like you mentioned at the first question, and you scratch an itch and say, oh, I'm looking at the internet, and I say, oh, this project looks interesting. Oh, but it's missing this feature. Am I going to fork the project, create a new one, add a feature, and then, no, I now have the skills, so I'm going to contribute. And there is this thing like, you are here in an open source project to do something. It's not about, I mean, one of the things I kind of trying to avoid is, you are not here as a consumer. You are not, we are trying, I think in the open source communities, most of the time, we are trying to get out of the consumer-producer relationship, which is kind of very basic in our society, but open source is trying to not do that, exactly. You are not a consumer, you are also a producer, and you get what you put in the system, right, if you're, and so the code of conduct should probably find a way, and I don't know really how to do that. It's not really contributing, it's about the practicalities. But conduct is really about saying, hey, if you come here, here is how we are expecting people to behave here. And contributing and being there to do something is important. It's not you're not the consumer. And I think that's a problem which a lot of, I would say, large and public-facing and consumer-facing projects are facing. Like, sometimes you get issues about, hey, I can't spin up my node. Oh, but yeah, but if you turn the power of the computer, that would be easier. Maybe. Obvious, this is a ridiculous example, but this kind of things that which has more to do with the usage and the fact that you are consuming an artifact which has been built by someone else than really doing something. And I think there is a fine line which there is threshold there that should be aware of.
Awesome, thank you. Matthias, anything you want to add?
Well, to be frank, not much to what Arnaud said. It's really, a code of conduct is a way to transcribe something that should be obvious in the first place, or maybe it's not obvious, but it is implicit, and you just want to make it clear how you expect people to behave. And if I wish to see one thing maybe in a code of conduct, that would be, do your best and assume that people are also doing their best. And it's usually true on the open source side, or from the interaction I've got, that's what it boils down to. And if you just follow these kind of simple rules, it usually help a lot with interactions and making sure that things happen in a nice way.
Yeah, in a way, it sounds like it's something that would make sense if you were standing around at a bar having a few drinks with friends and just coming up to some agreement on how should we behave. You could probably write it down, sleep on it, wake up the next morning and see if it still made sense, right? Maybe we could take each other up on that tonight and come up with a code of conduct for the MBO. How about that?
Yeah, and it's also something that is never really set in stone, right? If at some point you discover that there are new interactions and maybe you need to review something, you can, and that's the magic of open source.
Yeah, I mean, but it makes sense. Don't be a jerk, treat each other with kindness, right? Don't assume anything, and if you're not sure, ask, clarify, and try to de-escalate.
And it's not, one thing that it's not obvious in tech, especially because, there is also, this kind of idea of the hero character, or the fact that you are, there is a ranking, right? People rank against each other whether or not they achieve this thing, or they are, we have this kind of language wars and editors wars and whatever wars, and we keep trying to rank ourselves and to compete again. And I think one of the things maybe a code of conduct should enforce is we are not here to compete on this thing. We are here to collaborate on this thing. And collaboration is maybe a more, it's a true collaboration. Collaboration means that you are exposing yourself and you are also agreeing that, I'm here to contribute. Maybe I'm doing my best and everyone is doing his best, like Matthias said. And sometimes I make failures. And we have also to be aware that we fail sometimes and we make mistakes, and we all do, and that's okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we've got about a few minutes left here, but I want to kind of give everybody a chance to answer one last question. Let's fast forward. It's a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever. Where is the Cardano's open source ecosystem? Where would you like to see it? Lightning round.
Okay. I think that we should understand that source code, it's a liability. You need to maintain it, you need to upgrade it. The real asset is the process, how you develop the engineering team, the communication with the community, the back and forth of contributors. So I would like to see Cardano with focus on that process. That should be our main priority.
Absolutely.
Personally, I would like to see more contributors contributing to the core of Cardano as much as possible. Ideally, in 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now, people coming from TxPipe or from anywhere saying, hey, I got a PR against the consensus because I found some way to do it better, or I got a PR against the network layer because there is some twitch or whatever. That would be awesome, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's really seeing more people joining, sort of getting overwhelmed by everything that's happening on the open source ecosystem because it's getting very big and big. And I think I wish to see more, maybe different implementation of different core components that exist to force a collaboration on standardization, on interfaces, to see more people even contributing to the CIP process as well, have discussions around that with more reviewers, more people involved. And we've seen it getting traction over the years, so I'm pretty confident that this is the state we will end up in 2 to 3 years from now. I wish also to see more base tooling around Cardano. Right? A lot of toolings really came up recently on how do you interact with the chain, how do you get set up on Cardano, get started. And in a few years from now, I wish that anyone could really start this famous hello world we're discussing in maybe just a few minutes, right? So that would be cool.
Oh, awesome. That about does it for us up here. I want to thank you all so much for taking your time to share your thoughts. And I look forward to everything that's going to happen in Cardano's open source ecosystem. And I wish you all the best of luck with your projects. Let's take a selfie for social media. There you go. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Take care.